Namaste. Welcome to this session. We had considered the the topic of chitta parikarma, chitta parishuddhi, chitta prasadana, and we also considered that with chitta prasadana, what the yogi does, that his mind becomes capable, qualified, disposed, inclined to go into dhna sadhana, Ekatattvabhyasa, Ekatattvavalambana, samadhi sadhana. And the mind can now get that absorption required for samadhi. And these objects may be from grosser metaphysical to subtlest of metaphysical. And that's how the samadhi realm opens out for a yogi. So that was the sutra that came after the end of chitta parikarma topic. Now, what is to be noted here is that when we also sometimes experience our minds ennobled, and what figuratively is called as mind in the seventh heaven, it does happen to us sometimes. And when our minds are sublimated, the thing is that it happens once in a while, once in blue moon. Therefore, we unknowingly or quite habitually or organically consume such elated states and experience the delight and exhaust it. This is what happens, like when the sponge is dry, very dry, it will start collecting moisture, water, and it will gobble moisture and water immediately. It is because the sponge is very dry. Such thing also happen to we people in a mundane world. That we know usually we are tormented in this world. We are tossed between pains and pleasures. We have spikes in the emotional plane, on the emotional plane, on the mental plane, on the chaitic plane. And therefore, if once in a while we get this out of the world state of mind, this chitta, like a very dry sponge, immediately consumes it. And we are therefore consumers of such sublime experiences, because in the worldly gravities we hardly get it, and then once in a while we get it, we want to gobble it. So we are in the habit of gobbling such noble states that we get it by satsanga, we get it by going to shrines, we get it by in whatever form of yoga we practice, and then that is gobbled, consumed, and exhausted. And we are again back to square one. Like one of the mystic poets has said that every night we have wonderful out of the world experience. We are out of this world in a state of sleep. We are nobody's nobody, nobody's nobody to us. And we are free from all mundane gravities by way of caste, class, creed, gender, status, stature, desire, aspirations. And we have this almost a state which is akin to liberation. We actually get moksha every every night in our dreamless sleep, which might last for whatever duration. So for that time, we have the experience, what is called as out of the world experience. But again, we are back to square one when we wake up in the morning. So every morning, we are the same people. Although we have touchstone effect, although as I said in mysticism, it is told that we have a date with the Paramatma. We have the date with the Supreme Being, the Universal Being. But then again, we are back to square one in the morning. So, similarly, when we have such experiences, sublime and noble experiences, out of the world experiences, by way of whatever yoga we might be doing, or going to holy shrines, having exceptional satsanga, etc. So, the divine mind takes it all, absorbs it, and consumes it, because it doesn't get it usually. So it's a kind of party for it, which happens once in a while, and then it is exhausted, and again we are back to square one. So the point is, we are not able to invest our out of the world experiences, celestial experiences, or even beyond. We are not able to invest these experiences and invest them in something that is called as growth investment. It is exhausted, and these experiences are like petrol. The petrol, when it is exposed, in no time it evaporates, vaporizes. The substances like spirit and petrol are such that if they are exposed, soon they disappear. Similarly, our spiritual experiences, whatever we might be having, whenever we might be having, it's a rarity, no doubt about it. It's a rare experience that we have it. But then it immediately disappears in thin air. And again, we are the same. We are back to square one. This is what happens to us. And see the plight of human life. Our sorrows get invested immediately. But our happiness doesn't get so easily invested. Happiness is exhausted. We consume it because we like to consume it. So whenever we are happy and delighted, what do? When we experience sukham, we just consume it. We are also hungry for sukha. We have such a passion for sukha that we are so gluttonous to experience happiness, and we consume it and then finish it. But in case of sorrows, it doesn't happen like that. The sorrows linger, they stay, they get deposited here and there, and they go on surfacing now and then. So that's the difference between pain and pleasure, sorrow and delight. The delight doesn't get somewhere stored and doesn't get invested, but the sorrows get invested. The sorrows get invested, and we also earn interest on sorrows in the ways of sorrows. The sorrows stick around. The delights don't stick around. They are consumed. We want to eat the pleasures and delights. We want to eat them, relish them, enjoy them, exhaust them, finish them. That is not the case of sorrows. We do not experience a condition that sorrows are finished. But we often experience a state like pleasures and delights are finished. They get quickly finished. Now, these are out of the world experiences, they are further more evaporable, vaporable, and they disappear into thin air and we lose them. Not that we never get experiences, rich experiences, sublime experiences, out of the world experiences, spiritual experiences. We do get them. But this is what happens to we people who are sunk in mundane mire. But in yoga, for yogis, means for yoga, because every Tom, Dick and Harry is attempting yoga today. But in yoga, for yogis, there are schemes to collect all these experiences, deposit them somewhere, invest them somewhere, and reap the growth benefit in them. Because yogis have rich samskars. They have sublime and rich samskars and plethora of samskars. So, there is no case of gobbling and gulping these out of the world experiences. So, these divine experiences, godly experiences, out of the world experiences, daivi experiences, they get invested. And then, like, we charge the batteries. Yogis' sublimated batteries are charged. And even they are fully charged, they are immediately diverted to some reserve fund kind of thing, and they get into the reserve fund receptacle, and they get invested into growth kind of investments. And therefore, the yogis are able to have a huge collection and they can stack up the sublime impressions, because their samskars are such that there is no need for them to gobble and eat the experiences away. Like it happens to us that we want to eat the experience, such experiences, we want to eat them away. And then be again wait for, like it's a drought condition thereafter. So like the land, where there is a drought, the land is waiting for water to come in and water to seep through. And the moment it starts raining, it starts gobbling the water. It goes underground. The water quickly goes underground, disappears underground, because it has been drought for a long time. So there is drought of such sublime experiences for you and me, or the people in the mundane world engaged in materiality. And therefore, as and when it comes, it immediately goes like water going subsoil. This goes and then disappears. So, yogis have this kind of condition in them because of yoga samskars. Because their nirodha samskars are rich and plethora, enormous, huge. And therefore there is the built up in such samskars. And then because of the built up of these samskars and influx of these samskars, because of more frequent satsanga, more frequent sattva sanga, more frequent santa sanga, sadhu sanga, satya sanga, sadhana sanga, shastra sanga. So there is enormous influx of all these things. Yogi's mind is like the catchment area. The catchment area where all these sublime noble samskars get collected. And therefore, they are stacked up, they are built up, and there is a growth in such samskars. And therefore, yogi is able to invest them for samadhi sadhana. yogi is able to invest them for dhyana sadhana. And our case is that when we want to go for dhyana sadhana, we very much understand that we have lack of capital support. What is capital for dhyana sadhana? Is sublimity in chitta. And we have dearth of it. We have a drought of it. And therefore there is tremendous shortfall of these resources, what are called as daivi samskars, what are called as nirodha samskars or yoga samskars. But in case of a yogi, there is a plethora of that. And therefore, yogi is able to have those samskars invested. There is such a huge build-up of nirodha samskars that it immediately gets invested. Like for a rich man, if a lot of monies are already with him and a lot of monies are coming in, the monies get invested. They get invested in good schemes again, where there is the growth on a very big percentage. Whereas if a poor man gets a lakh of rupees or 5 lakhs of rupees, it just disappears into all essentials, because already there are essentials are not with him. So all that money immediately is gobbled by essentials, and the essentials come into the house, and again there is moneylessness. But for a rich person, when the money comes in, it can go for investments. When money comes in for a poor man, it all evaporates or vaporizes in essential commodities, because he has to first procure essentials. After there are sufficient essentials, then he will be going for comforts and luxuries. So, like dry land immediately, loose soil and dry soil immediately absorbs the water. For a poor man, any amount of money coming in is immediately it will be getting absorbed into essentials, and maybe there are lots of borrowings, so the borrowings will be cleared, the debts will be cleared, so the money just finds ways to go out and doesn't stay with the poor man. So, a mystic economist has said this, that money coming to a poor man doesn't stay with him. It has lots of ways to go here and there, because lots of debts are there. And then it goes into essentials, basic essentials, and then money evaporates. But for a rich man, it comes in and it goes into banks. It gets stacked up in the banks, and then from bank they go into investments. And then investments which reap a lot, because he is not wanting the money. So the investments are long-term investments, and therefore the growth schemes that we have, they go into growth schemes, and therefore they multiple in a big way. So similarly, for a yogi, the samskars, they are so rich, enormous, that the more he collects, it goes into investments, and his yoga samskars become richer and richer and richer, and then he is well disposed to go into samadhi sadhana. So when yogi does chitta parikarma, this is what happens. When we get chitta parikarma, again we are fit to carry out the nonsense of life subsequently, as soon as possible. That's why we have this habit today that yoga is practiced in the morning, where the people get up in the morning and do some yoga, and they are again free to do their nonsense of life for the entire day. At the end of the day, they will be again tired and fatigued and have a sleep, and then do some yoga. They are not only fresh, they are extra charged, their batteries are charged to again carry out nonsense of life. So we are caught in that vicious circle of yoga and bhoga. The yoga will charge our batteries, the bhoga will eat away our batteries. Again, yoga will charge our batteries, the bhoga will eat away our batteries, like it happens to our cell phones. We have to often charge the cell phones. The cell phones will be consuming the batteries. And then therefore we have to often charge it, and when we charge it, after we charge it, what do? We again start using for that our craze that we have today in using the cell phones and smartphones and computers or whatever. The batteries are charged and the batteries run down for very mundane purpose. That's what happens to us when we do our yoga, worldly people. The yoga charges our batteries, we are energetic, but then they get again exhausted by the bhoga which comes up thereafter. So we are constantly charging our batteries. And our batteries are such that once they can be charged at the most 100%. We cannot be storing them anywhere thereafter. Then there is a natural cutoff. When the cell phone is charged to 100%, a natural cutoff, that's all. But here, these energies go into storehouse. So when suppose the yogi is charged by 100%, then that charge goes into a deposit account. And they get deposited, they get stacked up, they get built up. And then there is so much of surplus that it gets invested. And then investment reaps further. So that is what the yogis have an arrangement. When the sublimity comes to them, it is not consumed, exhausted, and then finished. But it's already like a wet sponge, or which already has a water in it. When the sponge is already containing water, then it doesn't absorb. The sponge thereafter will not absorb water. Once it is full with water, unless you squeeze the water out of it, it will not again absorb. But there is the technology in yoga to allocate samskars, deposit samskars, invest samskars, and reap samskars out of samskars. So that is what is available, that technology is available for a yogi. And therefore, the yogi by chitta parikarma evolves the samadhi potentials, samadhi qualifications, samadhi dispositions, and samadhi schemes. He gets in front of him the schemes of samadhi, and the samadhis can get actualized. So samadhi potential is built up to start with. Then samadhi potential is sufficiently built up, then what happens is the samadhi gets actualized. So, like the example of milk, you can add a glass of milk, you can add a spoon of sugar, you can stir it, it will dissolve. Another spoon, stir it, it will dissolve. Another spoon, you will stir and it will dissolve. How long will it happen? There comes a time that the sugar doesn't dissolve, or salt doesn't dissolve in water after a while. So then what? The salt gets stacked up, or sugar gets stacked up. Similarly, in a yogic culture, for a yogi, these nirodha samskars, they come in, they develop samadhi potential, and when the samadhi potential is developed after an extent, then the samadhi will actualize, and some yogi will experience samadhis and will get samadhis. So that is how this chitta parikarma will work for a yogi. For us, the chitta parikarma will give a temporary kind of quiet condition, serene condition, tranquil condition, sublime condition, sedate condition, placid condition, heavenly condition. So it's only it comes only so much, and our embodiment sucks it, and therefore it is only temporary kind of seventh heaven condition for us. We never stay in seventh heaven. It is only for a short while by whatever yoga we do, and then again we are back to square one. Again we become deserts and waiting for such experiences expectantly. So this chitta parikarma takes yogi, lands yogi in what is called as samapatti. And that is the topic that is now following. Samapatti, samanakarapatti, or psychology of samadhi. The antaranga sadhana, you should know that dharana, dhyan, samadhi is antaranga sadhana of yoga. So the mind transits into antaranga sadhana. We have to push ourselves to antaranga sadhana. But here the mind transits into antaranga sadhana when sufficient nirodha samskars are collected, stacked up, accumulated. Daivi samskars, the divine samskars, noble samskars when they are accumulated. And this antaranga sadhana commences from pranayam. It is not pranayam of you and me, where our pranayam is to be doing some anduloma, pratiloma, and then perhaps even some agnisara kriya and kapalbhati kriyas. This is our pranayam. So by our pranayam we get health, because yoga promises health, we get health, and again it is all lost in our bhogarthatha, and again we need next morning again to do some yoga, so that every day we will be charging the batteries and discharging the batteries. This is what our pranayam is. The point is here that the antaranga sadhana commences by pranayam. By pranayam, the yogi's chitta becomes cosmicalized. Now it is no longer human chitta, personalized chitta, or human mind and personalized mind. When the mind is cosmicalized, the mind can now contain the cosmic subject matter. And with cosmic subject matter entering the yogi's mind, he gets samadhi on cosmic principles. Now his pranayam is pranayam, prana and pranava. Such mind naturally goes towards pranava, pranavavalambanam. Pranava means omkar, om. We have to utter omkar, we have to say omkar. The omkar manifests, resounds in a yogi. We have to utter and we have to produce the sound of om. While for a yogi, the om resounds. This is the difference between our embodiment and yogi's embodiment, our manifestation and yogi's manifestation, our avatara and yogi's avatara. So the pranava, prana, pranayam together leaps the yogi into the cosmic realm of consciousness, and his paramartha gallops with the help of prana, pranava, pranayama. And of course this pranayam is not the pranayam that you have idea of, some nadi shodhan, some surya bedhan, some chandra bedhan, some bhastrika. Today even kapalbhati has been included in pranayam. Agnisar, Kapalbhati, etc. So Yogi's pranayama is totally different. We are doing our pranayam for our physical health, well-being and corporeal health. That is why yoga is so popular in our times, because it gives us that health, corporeal health, cellular health, physical health, psychological health. But then it gets exhausted quickly. The batteries run down quickly. So the chitta parikarma is immediately followed by certain manifestations for a yogi. Now, your and my mind is quiet. What happens? Mind is quiet, we consume it. And after a while, it is lost. Our dish is empty. We go on consuming our quietude. What do we do with our quiet mind? Tell me. What do we do? We have no place to stack it, store it. There is no container where we can be depositing it and putting it. No. In that case, it would have come handy. Like many times our mind is absolutely in a turmoil, but we don't have a container from which we can pick up some peace and swallow the peace and become peaceful. No, we are not able to stack up. But yogi is able to do that. He has that samskara kosha where he is able to collect the delights and happinesses which give elation to mind. So, and then again we are back to square one, as I repeatedly have been telling you. Now here, for a yogi, after having carried out chitta parikarma, the chitta becomes steady. This is totally different than our minds becoming steady by our yoga. We also do our yoga and our mind becomes steady. But it is as fugitive as the Prakriti is. We lose it as soon as we get it. Getting is something that takes a long time. Losing it doesn't take at all any long time. With a snap of finger we can lose it. But we can't get peace of mind with a snap of finger. Or sublimity cannot come by snap of finger, but it can be lost. Something comes to our sight and it immediately leaves us and we lose it. So, yogi's mind, chitta, because of this parikarma, by way of whatever measures we have considered so far, the 7 measures, it becomes what is called as kshina vritti. Kshina vritti means rajatama vrittis dwindle. They get vaporized, they evaporate. While in our case, sattva guna comes and quickly evaporates. Sattva guna is like petrol and or it's like hot brick. Our mind is like hot brick. And sattva guna is like water sprinkled on it. No sooner it is sprinkled, it goes away. So that is what happens to sattva guna in us. It comes and in no time it goes away. Because our bricks are hot with rajatama gunas. Whereas here for a yogi, rajatama gunas get ejected from the chitta. And therefore it becomes rajatama vigata chitta. So that is called kshina vritti technically by Patanjali. And then what happens? The mind becomes immaculately pure. Because rajatama gunas have departed from the sight and sattva guna has come in plethora. So the mind becomes pure. Not only quiet, the mind becomes pure. The mind becomes immaculately transparent. And it becomes like a crystal. Mind becomes transparent like a crystal. These are all predicates which Patanjali has brought in his sutra to explain samapatti. And when it becomes like sphatika, when it becomes transparent like a crystal, The crystal, its characteristics are like this, that it has no color of its own. It is colorless. But anything comes underneath a crystal, the crystal takes that color, ditto emulation of that color, complete emulation of that color. So if you keep a red paper under crystal, crystal will appear red. If you remove the red paper and put purple paper, it will become purple. If you remove the purple and put yellow paper, it becomes yellow. That's how the crystal is. So the chitta becomes like a crystal. And these cosmic and metaphysical principles, they come underneath the chitta, and the chitta takes the form of that. Just as crystal takes the color of substrate, the chitta takes the form of cosmic metaphysical contents which come under it. Otherwise, the chitta is busy collecting all the mundane objects, worldly objects, bewitching objects, infatuating objects. But now, Rajatama gunas are gone, so there can be no scope for infatuation. So it is called abhijata mani. And then it takes tatstha tadanjanata. Tatsthata tadanjanata. It takes the form of it and it gets totally colorized by it. It takes a complete form of those objects, which are metaphysical contents now, which are going to appear to the mind. You know what objects appear to our minds? Shabda, sparsha, rupa, rasa, gandha. These objects come to our minds, but this is not the case of a yogi. So what comes to his mind is that these sublime cosmic objects. It will be interesting to note, our mind and a yogi's mind here, a factor of distinction here. See, our mind, suppose we have a very good sleep at night, and our sleep naturally ends in good hours of the morning. Our minds are like child, innocent. No, the adultery in the mind. Because when we are adults, there is a lot of adultery in our minds by way of malais, kama, krodha, lobha, moha, mada, matsarya. But very initial moments after we wake up, after a good, sound, natural, complete sleep, and that too in good hours of the early morning hours, then our mind is very fresh. The mind is transparent. There is no indentation of the mind. There is no taint in the mind. So it's just for a short while. Everyone experiences but doesn't really note it down. And then soon the physical objects of this world, mental objects of this world start getting mounted on our minds. And no sooner the mind becomes our mind, very mundane mind, reactionary mind. So the pains and pleasures quickly get mounted on our minds within a fraction of a second. When we get up in the early morning, we have that non-dual state of mind. But soon we are engulfed by all kinds of dualities, all kinds of physical and mental objects of this world, and we become what we are really in this world. So when our minds are quiet, they, like dry sponge, attracts moisture from atmosphere. Our pure minds absorb the physical mental objects of this world in the form of shabda, sparsha, rupa, rasa, gandha, the mental objects in the form of vasanas and in the form of vasana smruti. So they start rushing on our mind. They totally occupy our mind, and then our mind is totally stormed by the mundane vasanas and worldly vasanas. So this is what happens to our quiet mind. No sooner the mind is quiet, immediately it is attacked and stormed by turbulence of this world. When a mind is really passionless, desireless, objectless, it's just for a short while and quickly it will be occupied and invaded and conquered by objects of this world, physical, mental objects of this world. And then the mind will be again slave of those objects. So when our mind is quiet, this is what happens. But when yogi's mind is quiet, something else is happening. That is what we are seeing from Patanjali Sutra on Samapatti. So he characterizes it as kshina vritti. Rajatama vritti is gone. So therefore, it will not attract pains and pleasures, desires and hankerings of the world and crazes that we have in the world. Then it becomes abhijata iva manehe. It becomes like abhijata mani, abhijata crystal, immaculate crystal, pure crystal. Then what? The crystal is something that anything that comes underneath it, it will take the color of it. Now here, in yogi's pure mind, only metaphysical and cosmic objects are going to come. Unlike our condition, when our mind is quiet, the mundane objects are going to rush to our mind and occupy our minds. This is what happens to you and me. Because we do not have sufficient yoga samskars in us. You might do yoga and we might get benefit of yoga, but the yoga samskars are not formulated. So, formulation of yoga samskars is so important in classical yoga by way of satsanga, sadhana sanga, shastra sanga, sattvic ahar vihar, achar vichar, yajna dhna tapas. So in case of a yogi, only cosmic objects come to the mind, not the worldly objects. Now the mind is bereft of any object after chitta parikarma. But then which are the objects which are going to come to a yogi's mind is that these are metaphysical objects, cosmic objects, which are worth sakshatkara. So that's the distinction between our clean mind, our empty mind, our quiet and sublime steady mind. So if our mind is steady, these rajasic objects will invade our mind and they will occupy, they will conquer. And the mind will be conquered. And then these are objects which come to immaculate chitta, transparent chitta, sphatika-like chitta, crystal-like chitta of a yogi. And then there is tatsthata tadanjanata. These are metaphysical objects. These are not visible objects. These are not tangible objects. These are visible and invisible and metaphysical objects, noumenal objects. The chitta can now catch these noumenal objects. Our chitta cannot catch noumenal objects. Therefore, it's all agnostic to us. Noumenal means agnostic. And then there will be samanakarata. The chitta will take the form of it. Like we have vishayakarata. Our chitta takes vishayakarata. Shabda vishayakarata, sparsha vishayakarata, rupa vishayakarata, rasa vishayakarata, rasa, gandha. So our mind takes the form of these objects and then we have obsessional attachment to these objects. But yogi with his abhyasa vairagya, these objects have no entries. And the objects which have entries are the cosmic objects, metaphysical objects, samadhi objects. And the mind gets steadied into such objects. Mind gets colorized by these objects and then it takes the form of those objects. Just as our chitta can take form of objects. You imagine rose, your chitta will become rose. You imagine ice cream, the chitta will become ice cream. So that's what happens to us in worldly objects, tangible objects, the vasana consisting objects. Whereas here, these are nirvasana objects. And then he gets tassata tadanjanata, tadakara patti. And that is samanakara patti. And that is samapatti. The yogi's mind goes into samadhis, and samadhi objects get infested. The chitta gets infested by samadhi objects, permeated by samadhi objects. So that is what Patanjali is saying. So his sutra 1.41 क्षीणवृत्तेः अभिजातस्य इव मणेः ग्रहितृ ग्रहण ग्राह्येषु तस्य तदञ्जनता समापत्ति. So what are these metaphysical objects? They are of three classes. So we will be trying to understand what are these three classes of samadhis. So in one classification there are only three samadhis. These samadhi that is based on samadhi contents. So there are samadhi contents are of three classes: grahitru, grahana, grahya. That is samadhi knowable, samadhi knowing, and the samadhi knower entity. So grahitru is the knower entity, grahana is knowing entity, and grahya is knowable entity. So knowable are metaphysical principles of Panchamahabhutas, Panchatanmatras. If you recall the topic of Samprajñata Samadhi, we saw those Vitarkanugata, Vicharanugata, Anandanugata, Asmitanugata, the four classes of Samadhis. These four classes of Samadhis pertain to three categories. And these categories are Grahitru, Grahana, Grahya. So he has samapatti of one of the three classes, or two of the three classes, or three of the three classes. And that is called samapatti. And samapatti is psychology of samadhi. So now we will be trying to understand when yogi's mind is sublime, sublime objects occupy his chitta. When our mind is sublime, the mind is free to accept worldly objects. They immediately get seats. They occupy the seats. All seats are filled up in no time. But in case of yogi, when the mind is placid, quiet, sublime, these objects have no entry. The entry to objects are metaphysical entity, sakshatkar, vishayas, where intuitive revelations is necessary. Those objects only get the seats. So it is a program for special invitees and not the crowd of worldly entities, worldly objects. So therefore it becomes samadhi for him. And for us, we immediately leap into vyuthana. Our mind becomes worldly, our mind becomes mundane, our mind becomes personal, and then personal gravities start playing havoc. Vasanas start playing havoc. And we know what happens to our minds when the mind is quiet. It becomes free gate, open gate for disquietude to come in. So there is no restriction for disquietude to be entering when the mind is quiet. It has a wonderful opportunity, gates open for disquietude to enter the mind when our minds are quiet. When our minds are sublime, unsublimity has open gates to enter our minds, and it quickly occupies all the seats, and then it gets overcrowded with unsublime objects, tendencies and desires. So this is what happens to our auditorium of the mind. So when it is opened, see what is entering. When yogi's auditorium of the chitta is open, see it is only special invitees, which are only samadhi objects, grahitru grahana grahya objects, vitarka objects, vichara objects, ananda objects, asmita objects. So it's a program for invitees. It is not a public program. Our mind is open for public program. Any Tom, Dick and Harry can enter our mind. And we know how much the worst things enter our mind and drive away all that best in our minds. Whereas here, because of Kshina Vritti, Rajatama Vritti is being expelled, ejected, only Sattvic Vrittis start taking seats. So they are special invitees in Yogi's Chitta. And therefore, he heads for Samadhi Sakshatkar. So this is what happens to Chitta Parishkruta Yogi. Totally different than when our Chitta is Parishkruta. When our Chitta is cosmicalized, we know what happens subsequently. When Yogi's Chitta is cosmicalized, we are being told what happens. And that is what we are going to now look into, which is the topic of Samapatti, psychedelic delineation. The inexplicable has been beautifully articulated by Patanjali and Vyasa. So we are going to embark upon what can be called as Samadhi psychology, psychology of Samadhi. That is called Samapatti. So we will start looking at it right from the Sutra 141. At this Sutra by Sutra, try to unfold the whole topic and experience this psychedelic delineation of Yoga Darshana. So that is enough for the time being. Namaskar all of you.